Hello, I present to you my latest novel, Ascension of the Divine, Chapter 21, Spirits of the Ancients. The air crackled with tension as the ghostly figures coalesced around them, their forms shifting like smoke, illuminated by the eerie glow of the orb. Wei Long instinctively stepped back, positioning himself protectively in front of Lin Mei and the other warriors. The ancient spirits bore expressions that were both sorrowful and fierce, as if they were caught between their past and the present intrusion. "Why have you come?" The lead spirit intoned, its voice echoing through the chamber like thunder. "This place is sacred, a resting ground for those who have passed. Your presence is an affront." Wei Long swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "We seek knowledge and strength to defend our home from the Jade Serpent Sect. We do not wish to disturb your peace, but we have no choice." The spirit's gaze bore into him, weighing his words. Many have sought the power of this site, yet few have proven worthy. To claim the orb is to embrace its burden. It requires a sacrifice. Lin Mei stepped forward, her voice steady. "What kind of sacrifice? We are willing to fight for our home, but we cannot sacrifice our lives without understanding the cost." The spirit's form flickered with intensity. "The orb holds immense power, drawn from the very essence of the earth. It can amplify your abilities, but it demands a price in return. To wield its strength, one must confront their deepest fears and regrets." Wei Long's heart raced at the implications. The burden of such power was immense, and he knew that confronting one's fears could lead to unforeseen consequences. But the stakes were high, and they had no time to hesitate. "We accept the challenge," Wei Long declared, his voice unwavering. "If it means protecting our people, we are willing to face whatever trials await us." The spirit regarded him silently for a moment before nodding slowly. "Very well. If you wish to prove yourselves, you must each confront the manifestations of your past. Only then will you be deemed worthy of the orb." As the last word left the spirit's lips, the chamber began to shift. The walls morphed, twisting into shadows that spiraled around them, enveloping each warrior in darkness. Wei Long felt his heart pounding in his chest, and before he could brace himself, the darkness consumed him. He found himself standing in a desolate landscape, a familiar place from his childhood, the training grounds of his old sect. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cracked earth. He could see figures sparring in the distance, their movements fluid and practiced. But as he approached, he felt a chilling recognition. It was a memory, a painful one. There, among the fighters, he saw himself, a younger Wei Long, filled with ambition and pride. Beside him stood his closest friends, laughter and camaraderie flowing freely between them. Suddenly, the laughter turned to shouts, and the ground trembled as the vision shifted. The joyous scene morphed into chaos. A group of sect disciples burst in, weapons drawn, their faces twisted in anger. The memory flooded back. The day the sect was raided, the day he lost everything. "Help!" a voice cried out, pulling him from the haze. He turned to see his friends, once vibrant, now ghostly figures, being overwhelmed. He felt the surge of helplessness wash over him, a familiar feeling that gripped his heart. "No," he shouted, reaching for them, but they were just out of reach, shadows fading into the night. "You couldn't save them then," a voice taunted, echoing through the void. "What makes you think you can protect anyone now?" The words struck like a physical blow, and Wei Long staggered back, pain flashing through him. He realized that this was his greatest fear, the fear of failure, of being unable to protect those he cared about. He drew a deep breath, grounding himself. "I may have failed in the past," he said firmly, "but I will not allow it to happen again. I will fight for my friends, for my people. I am stronger now. I will not let fear control me." As he spoke, the shadows around him began to dissipate. The figures of his friends smiled at him one last time before fading away, leaving behind a flickering light that grew brighter, illuminating the dark landscape. Suddenly, Wei Long felt the ground shift beneath him once more. In an instant, he was back in the chamber, standing before the lead spirit. The other warriors had also returned, each appearing shaken yet resolute. The spirit observed them closely. "You have faced your past. You were given the opportunity to turn back, to embrace your fears. Yet you chose to confront them. This is the mark of a true warrior." Lin Mei stepped forward, her expression fierce. "We are not afraid of our pasts. We are here to forge a new future. But we need the power of the orb to do so. The spirit nodded. You have shown your strength of will. Now, who among you will claim the orb? Wei Long exchanged glances with Lin Mei and the others. He knew this was a pivotal moment, but he also understood that the orb's power could be overwhelming. I will do it, he said, stepping forward. I've faced my fears. If this power can help protect my home, then I'll accept its burden. The spirit raised an ethereal hand, gesturing toward the orb. Very well, Wei Long. Claim your destiny. As he approached the altar, the orb pulsed with energy, drawing him closer. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool surface. Instantly, a surge of power coursed through him, filling him with a sense of clarity and strength. Visions flooded his mind, images of battles yet to come, of allies standing together against a tide of darkness. But alongside them were warnings, of the price he would pay for such power, of the choices he would need to make. Yet even as the weight of these choices settled on his shoulders, he felt a new sense of purpose awaken within him. This was not merely power, it was a tool to forge a better future. As Wei Long withdrew his hand, the orb's glow intensified, enveloping him in radiant light. He felt the energy flowing into him, sharpening his senses, enhancing his abilities, and forging a connection to the land itself. When the light faded, he stood before the spirit once more, his presence radiating with newfound energy. You are now bound to the essence of this site, the spirit proclaimed. Use this power wisely, for it is both a gift and a burden. With the orb secured, the group took a moment to gather themselves. The path back would be equally perilous, but Wei Long felt a renewed sense of confidence. Let's move, he said, determination resonating in his voice. We have a fight to prepare for. As they retraced their steps through the tunnel, Wei Long felt the weight of the orb resting in his possession, a beacon of hope and a reminder of the sacrifices they had all made. He couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. Emerging from the mountains, the air was heavy with anticipation. The storm was closing in, and the time for action was upon them. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together, warriors united against a common foe. The alliance would stand strong, and the Jade Serpent Sect would soon learn that their ambition had awakened a force they could not control. Chapter 22: Unleashing the Storm. The descent from the mountains was just as treacherous as the climb. The wind howled through the peaks, and the jagged rocks seemed to reach out, threatening to pull them into the abyss. Wei Long led the group down, the orb still radiating with a faint glow in his pack, its weight a constant reminder of the power he had claimed, and the burden it placed on him. Lin Mei kept pace beside him, her eyes scanning their surroundings. Though they had fought and defeated the creature that guarded the entrance, the mountain range was vast, and there were surely other threats lurking in the shadows. As they moved through the narrow mountain path, Lei Feng, ever vigilant, broke the silence. We should prepare for an ambush. The Jade Serpent Sect must have scouts keeping an eye on this region. If they realize what we've acquired, they won't hesitate to strike. Wei Long nodded, his mind already calculating their next moves. We'll need to move quickly. If they've caught wind of our mission, we could face an attack at any moment. As if on cue, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the valley below. Wei Long raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. Everyone fell silent, the tension thick in the cold air. From the corner of his eye, he saw Lin Mei's hand twitch towards her daggers, her body coiled like a spring, ready to strike. A low rumble followed the footsteps, a sound that sent a shiver down Wei Long's spine. These weren't ordinary scouts. They're coming, Lei Feng whispered, his voice grim, and they brought something with them. The warriors formed a tight circle, their weapons drawn. The mist swirling around the cliffs seemed to grow thicker, making it harder to see. Every shadow became a potential threat, every gust of wind a warning. Suddenly, the ground trembled. From the fog, massive figures began to emerge, hulking forms draped in dark cloaks, their faces hidden beneath masks. These were not mere soldiers of the Jade Serpent Sect. They were war beasts, creatures enhanced by dark cultivation, their bodies twisted and monstrous. Leading them was a man cloaked in black, his face obscured by a silver mask. His aura was oppressive, the dark energy surrounding him palpable even at a distance. Wei Long's heart raced. This was no ordinary foe. Stay sharp. He barked, tightening his grip on his sword. The masked man stepped forward, his voice like cold steel. I see you've retrieved something valuable. Hand it over, and perhaps I'll let you leave here with your lives. Wei Long met his gaze, unflinching. We're not giving you anything. The man tilted his head slightly as if amused. So be it. Without warning, the war beasts charged. Their enormous bodies moved with unnatural speed, claws digging into the rocky ground as they barreled towards the group. Wei Long barely had time to shout a command before the first beast was upon them, its massive claw slashing towards him. He sidestepped, driving his sword into the creature's side. The beast roared in pain, but it wasn't enough to stop its momentum. It swung again, and this time, Wei Long was forced to throw himself to the ground to avoid being crushed. Lin Mei leapt into the fray, her daggers flashing in quick, precise strikes. She danced around the second beast, avoiding its attacks with an almost effortless grace. With a swift slash, she severed one of its tendons, causing the massive creature to stumble. Lei Feng and the others fought fiercely, but the beasts were relentless. For every wound they inflicted, the creatures seemed to grow angrier, their roars shaking the very earth beneath them. The masked man stood back, watching the battle unfold with cold detachment. Wei Long gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his feet. He knew they couldn't win this fight by sheer force. These beasts were too strong, and the dark cultivator was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He glanced at Lin Mei, who met his gaze with a sharp nod. She understood. This wasn't a fight they could win head-on. Fall back, Wei Long shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. We can't take them like this. Regroup. The group began to pull back, retreating up the slope, but the beasts were relentless. One of them lunged towards Wei Long, and he barely had time to react. As it closed in, his hand instinctively went to the orb in his pack. The power within it pulsed, almost as if it were responding to his need. Without thinking, he drew on the energy of the orb, letting it flow through him. In an instant, the world around him seemed to slow. His movements became sharper, his senses heightened. He could feel the spiritual energy of the land beneath him, the pulse of life and power coursing through the earth. The war beast reared back to strike, but this time Wei Long was ready. With a swift, powerful slash, his sword cleaved through the creature's hide, the enhanced strength of the orb's power flowing into the blade. The beast let out a pained roar, collapsing to the ground in a heap. The others saw the shift, their eyes widening as they realized what had just happened. Lin Mei flashed him a quick grin before darting in to finish off another war beast with her daggers. The masked man's cold demeanor faltered for the first time. He stepped forward, his dark aura flaring around him like a storm. So, you've decided to use it. Let's see how far that power takes you. He moved with blinding speed, his sword flashing as he closed the distance between them in the blink of an eye. Wei Long barely managed to block the strike, the force of the blow sending a shockwave through his arms. The dark cultivator pressed forward, his strikes relentless. Wei Long's enhanced senses allowed him to keep up, but just barely. The man's strength was overwhelming, and Wei Long could feel the strain of maintaining the orb's power with every strike. You're not the first to wield such power, the man sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. But all who have tried before you were consumed by it. What makes you think you'll be any different? Wei Long didn't respond. He couldn't afford to waste energy on words. His mind raced, searching for an opening. The man was strong, but there was something off about his movements. It was as if he was holding back, testing Wei Long's limits. In a split second, Wei Long saw his chance. As the dark cultivator raised his sword for another strike, Wei Long shifted his stance, dodging to the side and driving his sword forward. The blade grazed the man's side, and for a brief moment, his aura flickered. The man staggered back, his eyes narrowing behind the mask. Impressive, but you've only scratched the surface. With a flick of his wrist, the man unleashed a wave of dark energy, sending Wei Long and the others sprawling back. The ground trembled as the energy tore through the mountain, leaving a deep scar in the earth. Wei Long struggled to his feet, panting. The orb's power was incredible, but it was draining him fast. He could feel its pull, the temptation to draw more from it, to push beyond his limits. But he knew the risks. The orb's power was a double-edged sword. and if he wasn't careful, it could consume him. The dark cultivator was preparing for another strike, his aura crackling with malevolent energy. Wei Long knew they couldn't hold out much longer. They needed to find a way to end this, quickly. As he braced himself for the next attack, a sudden burst of light flared from behind him. He turned just in time to see Lin Mei, her daggers glowing with spiritual energy, launching herself at the dark cultivator. She moved with blinding speed, her strikes precise and unrelenting. The man deflected her attacks, but his movements were slower now, more labored. He was tiring, and Lin Mei was exploiting every weakness she could find. "Now!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of battle. Wei Long didn't hesitate. He surged forward, drawing on the last reserves of his strength. With a powerful swing of his sword, he aimed for the masked man's exposed side. The blade connected, and this time the dark cultivator let out a sharp cry of pain. He staggered back, clutching his wound. His aura flickered, and for the first time, there was a hint of fear in his eyes. "You will regret this," he hissed, his voice filled with venom. But before he could retaliate, he vanished into the shadows, his form dissolving into the mist. The remaining war beasts, sensing their master's retreat, let out low growls before retreating into the darkness as well. Wei Long collapsed to his knees, the weight of exhaustion crashing down on him. The power of the orb still pulsed within him, but he could feel its pull weakening as the immediate danger passed. Lin Mei knelt beside him, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "We did it. We drove him off." Wei Long nodded weakly, his body trembling from the strain. "For now. But he'll be back. And next time, he won't be holding back." Lin Mei helped him to his feet, her gaze hardening. "We'll be ready, together." As the group regrouped, the sun began to break through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the mountains. They had survived this battle, but the war was far from over. And Wei Long knew that the true test of their strength was still to come. Chapter 23. Whispers of Betrayal. The sun's light flickered through the mountain mist, casting long shadows as the group descended further from the ancient temple. Despite their recent victory, the weight of the fight against the dark cultivator and his war beasts hung heavy in the air. The orb, still pulsing faintly in Wei Long's pack, felt like a living presence, urging him to use it more, to draw on its strength again. He resisted the temptation for now, knowing the cost of over-reliance on its power. "We can't rest for long," Lin Mei said, her voice steady, but her eyes scanning their surroundings. "The Jade Serpent Sect knows we're a threat now. They'll come at us harder next time." "Let them," Lei Feng growled, his fist still clenched. "We've already taken down their beasts. We can handle whatever they throw at us." Wei Long remained silent, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He could feel the truth in Lin Mei's words. This was just the beginning. The Jade Serpent Sect had underestimated them, but that wouldn't last long. Soon they would send their strongest forces, and the next confrontation would be even more brutal. As the group pressed onward, they came to a narrow ravine, where the rocky path forced them to walk single file. The air was tense, each of them hyper-aware of the danger that could strike at any moment. Wei Long walked at the front, his senses heightened, his connection to the orb still lingering in the back of his mind. Suddenly, he heard a faint whisper on the wind. It wasn't the sound of the mountains or the howling breeze. It was something else, something darker. "Wei Long." He stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It sent a cold shiver down his spine. "Wei Long, you cannot trust them." He glanced around, but no one else seemed to hear it. Lin Mei gave him a questioning look, but before he could respond, the whisper came again, more insistent this time. "They are not your allies. They are your enemies." The voice was clear now, and Wei Long's mind raced. It was the orb. He could feel its influence seeping into him, not just offering power, but trying to manipulate his thoughts. "Wei Long?" Lin Mei's voice broke through his trance. "What's wrong?" He blinked, shaking off the creeping sensation of doubt. Nothing. Just tired. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't the truth. The orb had spoken to him, and worse, it had tried to plant seeds of distrust. He couldn't afford to let it cloud his judgment. Not now. As they continued through the ravine, Wei Long's mind turned over the orb's words again and again. Could it be right? Was there someone in the group who couldn't be trusted? Nightfall found them at the edge of the mountain range, where they made camp in a secluded hollow. A small fire crackled between them, providing a brief respite from the harsh cold of the peaks. Wei Long sat a little apart from the others, his mind still troubled by the whispers he had heard. Lin Mei approached him, her eyes sharp but softened with concern. "You've been distant since the fight. Are you sure everything's okay?" Wei Long hesitated. He had always trusted Lin Mei. She had been by his side through every trial, every battle. But the orb's words haunted him. What if she was the one it had warned him about? What if she wasn't as loyal as she seemed? "I'm fine," he replied, trying to sound convincing. "Just thinking about the battle and what's coming next." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "We're all feeling the pressure. But whatever happens, we have each other's backs. We'll get through this." He forced a smile. "Yeah, we will." As Lin Mei walked back to join the others, Wei Long's thoughts continued to churn. Could it be Lei Feng? He was always eager to fight, sometimes reckless in battle. Or perhaps it was one of the newer members of their group, those who had joined after they'd formed the alliance. The orb's power might be making him paranoid, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Just as he was about to dismiss the thought, he noticed Lei Feng standing apart from the others, talking in low tones to one of the newer recruits, a man named Gao Ren. Their conversation seemed heated, their expressions tight. Wei Long narrowed his eyes. What were they talking about? That night, as the others slept, Wei Long kept watch. He couldn't rest, not with the orb's whispers gnawing at his mind. The night was still, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. Lei Feng was slipping away from the camp, moving quietly but purposefully. Wei Long's suspicions flared to life, and without a word, he followed. Keeping his distance, Wei Long trailed Lei Feng through the trees, his heart pounding. What was he up to? After several minutes, Lei Feng came to a stop near a cluster of boulders, where Gao Ren was waiting for him. Wei Long crouched behind a rock, listening intently. Are we sure about this? Gao Ren's voice was low, filled with doubt. Lei Feng's response was cold and direct. The time will come. When it does, we act, you know what's at stake. Wei Long's blood ran cold. What were they planning? Gao Ren hesitated, but then nodded. I just hope it's worth it. Betraying him won't be easy. Betraying who? Wei Long's mind raced. Were they talking about him? Was this the betrayal the orb had warned him about? Suddenly, Lei Feng stiffened, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. We're not alone. Wei Long cursed under his breath. He had been too focused on their conversation and hadn't noticed Lei Feng's sharp instincts picking up his presence. Before he could react, Lei Feng spun around, his sword flashing in the moonlight. Wei Long barely had time to raise his own weapon before Lei Feng was upon him, their blades clashing in a burst of sparks. Spying on us, Wei Long? Lei Feng growled, his eyes cold and calculating. What are you planning? Wei Long demanded, blocking another strike. Lei Feng's expression darkened. You wouldn't understand. Wei Long pressed harder, his strikes fierce. Try me. But Lei Feng's response was swift and brutal. With a quick, unexpected move, he disarmed Wei Long, sending his sword clattering to the ground. Before Wei Long could recover, Lei Feng had him pinned against the boulder, his sword at Wei Long's throat. You're too trusting, Wei Long, Lei Feng said, his voice almost sad. That's why you'll never win this war. For a moment, Wei Long thought it was over. But then, in the distance, the sound of footsteps and shouts reached them. The others had noticed their absence and were on their way. Lei Feng cursed, releasing Wei Long and stepping back. This isn't over, he hissed, before disappearing into the shadows with Gao Ren. Wei Long collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The orb had been right. There was betrayal in their ranks, and now he knew the faces behind it. But the question remained, what would he do next? Chapter 24, Seeds of Deception. The next morning, the camp stirred as the sun peeked over the horizon, casting golden rays over the mountain's edge. Wei Long hadn't slept. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts, the memory of Lei Feng's betrayal gnawing at him. He glanced around the camp, the familiar faces of his companions now colored with suspicion. Could he trust anyone? Lei Feng sat casually by the fire, his expression unreadable. To any other observer, he appeared relaxed, as if nothing unusual had occurred the night before. Wei Long, however, knew better. The brief confrontation they'd had weighed heavy in the air, like a secret ready to explode. Lin Mei noticed Wei Long's unease, her keen eyes catching every subtle twitch of his face. She approached him, her brow furrowed with concern. "Something's wrong. I can feel it. Did something happen last night?" Wei Long hesitated. The orb's warnings echoed in his mind, but there was something deeper at play now. If he revealed Lei Feng's betrayal too early, it could fracture the group, and that was a risk they couldn't afford. But if he kept quiet, it would give Lei Feng the time he needed to strike again, possibly with fatal consequences. "No," Wei Long said after a long pause, his voice steady but tinged with tension. "Just a lot on my mind." Lin Mei didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. "We'll need to move soon. We're getting closer to the Jade Serpent Sect's territory, and the scouts could be on us at any time." Wei Long nodded, keeping his eyes on Lei Feng. The trader's calm demeanor infuriated him. He had to find out more about his motives before making a move. For now, he'd watch and wait. As they traveled further down the mountain, the terrain began to level out, transitioning from jagged rocks to dense forests. The path became narrow and winding, shrouded in thick trees that blocked out much of the sunlight. The group moved cautiously, their senses alert for any sign of danger. Wei Long's mind, however, was elsewhere. Every step he took, he felt the pull of the orb at his side, like a low hum in the background. It had warned him of Lei Feng's betrayal, but at what cost? He didn't trust the orb, not fully, and he could feel its dark energy creeping into his thoughts more and more. The line between friend and foe blurred as the whispers continued to haunt him. As they crossed a narrow, Lei Feng moved ahead of the group, scouting the path ahead. Lin Mei signaled for a quick rest by the water, and the others gladly took the opportunity to replenish their strength. Wei Long stood by the edge of the stream, gazing into the clear waters, his reflection staring back at him with eyes that seemed older, more weary. "You look lost in thought." He turned to see Lin Mei standing beside him, her sharp gaze softened with concern. "What's on your mind, really?" Wei Long sighed, knowing he couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. "I overheard something last night," he began, keeping his voice low. "Lei Feng and Gao Ren, they're planning something against us." Lin Mei's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. "They talked about betrayal. I don't know the full extent of it, but Lei Feng said something about waiting for the right moment to act. I think they're planning to turn on us." Lin Mei was silent for a moment, her face a mix of disbelief and anger. "Lei Feng? But he's fought with us for so long. Why would he betray us now?" Wei Long shook his head. "I don't know, but I can't ignore what I heard. We need to be careful. We can't let him know we're onto him until we figure out the full scope of what's happening." Lin Mei's expression hardened. "We should confront him, now, before he has a chance to make his move." "No," Wei Long said quickly, glancing over at the rest of the group. "We can't let this tear us apart. If we accuse him now without proof, it could cause more damage than we're ready for. We need to gather evidence, watch his every move. When the time is right, we'll act." Lin Mei's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but if he puts anyone in danger, I won't hesitate." As the day wore on, the tension between Wei Long and Lei Feng grew thicker, though neither man showed it openly. The group continued through the forest, but the undercurrent of distrust gnawed at Wei Long, making every small movement from Lei Feng feel like a threat. By the time the sun began to set, the group found a clearing where they could set up camp for the night. It was a quiet spot, hidden from the main roads and shielded by tall trees that provided cover from prying eyes. Wei Long, however, felt no sense of peace. After dinner, while the others were preparing to rest, Gao Ren approached Wei Long with an easy smile. "How's your arm, Wei Long? You've been looking a bit stiff since our last battle." Wei Long kept his voice neutral. "I'm fine. Just need some rest." Good. We're all going to need our strength soon," Gao Ren said, his tone casual, but laced with something Wei Long couldn't quite place. As Gao Ren walked away, Wei Long's suspicion deepened. He was sure now. Both Lei Feng and Gao Ren were in on whatever plot was brewing. But he still didn't know how or when they planned to strike. Late that night, Wei Long sat on the edge of the camp, keeping watch. The forest around them was eerily quiet, with only the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. His hand rested on the orb in his pack, its pulse faint but constant, like a heartbeat. As he sat there, the whispers returned. "You are in danger." Wei Long's grip tightened on the orb. He could feel its power pushing against the boundaries of his will, urging him to act, to confront, to destroy the threats around him. Trust no one. He clenched his teeth, resisting the dark allure of the orb's influence. He knew it wanted him to give in, to draw on its power fully. But once he did, would he still be in control? Or would it consume him, just as the dark cultivator had warned? Suddenly, he heard movement behind him. He turned quickly, his hand on his sword, only to see Lin Mei stepping out of the shadows. "You're not resting either," she said quietly, taking a seat beside him. "No," he replied, relaxing slightly. "I can't shake the feeling that something's about to happen." Lin Mei looked out into the forest, her eyes thoughtful. "We've been through a lot, Wei Long. Betrayals, battles, enemies we never thought we'd face. But this... it feels different, doesn't it?" Wei Long nodded. "It does. We're closer to the Jade Serpent Sect's heart now. The real fight is about to begin, and we're not just dealing with enemies from outside." Lin Mei glanced over at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you trust me?" The question caught him off guard. After everything, after the orb's whispers and Lei Feng's betrayal, he realized how much he had begun to doubt those around him. But as he looked into Lin Mei's eyes, he found no deception there, only loyalty. "I do," he said finally, his voice firm. "I trust you." She smiled faintly. "Good, because we're going to need each other more than ever now." As the night wore on, the two sat in silence, their shared understanding unspoken. In the distance, the forest remained still, but Wei Long knew that the storm of conflict was closer than ever. The seeds of deception had been planted, and soon, the truth would be revealed, one way or another. Chapter 25, Rising Storm. The days passed with a steady, uneasy rhythm. As Wei Long and his group pushed deeper into the Jade Serpent Sect's territory, the weight of betrayal loomed like a dark cloud, ever present but just out of reach. Every interaction between Lei Feng and Gao Ren was now scrutinized, yet neither made a misstep, neither offered a clue that might expose their true intentions. The silence of it all was driving Wei Long mad. The orb pulsed with dark energy more frequently now, like a constant whisper in his mind, urging him to act, to take matters into his own hands. His grip on the orb tightened as he remembered the night he followed Lei Feng, his near defeat, the sword at his throat. He had survived, but barely, and now the traitors walked freely beside him, unchallenged. They will strike soon, Wei Long thought, his instincts sharper than ever. He could feel the rising tension like a storm building on the horizon, one that would eventually break and drown them all in blood. On the 5th day, they reached the outermost territory of the Jade Serpent Sect. The air was heavy with humidity, and the forest had grown denser, the trees larger, their canopies intertwining to form a natural ceiling that blocked out much of the sunlight. Here, every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the creaking of old branches in the wind, and the occasional distant roar of beasts unknown. "We should be careful," Lin Mei said, as they approached a wide ravine. The cliffs on either side were steep and jagged, making it an ideal place for an ambush. "If they know we're coming, they'll choose spots like this to strike." Lei Feng, who had taken the lead, glanced back, his expression calm. "We'll cross quickly. Keep your weapons ready, but don't show fear. If they sense hesitation, they'll attack." Wei Long's eyes narrowed. The way Lei Feng commanded the group felt wrong now. The man who had fought by his side for so long was no longer an ally. He was a predator, waiting for the right moment to pounce. And Wei Long wouldn't give him that chance. The group crossed the ravine without incident, but the oppressive feeling in the air only grew heavier. As they continued through the forest, Lin Mei's brow furrowed, her instincts telling her something was off. "Do you feel that?" she asked quietly as she fell into step beside Wei Long. He nodded. "We're being watched." The others sensed it too. Lei Feng's eyes were scanning the trees, and Gao Ren's hand rested on the hilt of his blade, ready to draw at a moment's notice. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and each of them knew they were no longer alone. Suddenly, a shrill whistle cut through the air. "Ambush!" Lei Feng shouted, his sword flashing as he raised it to defend against the first wave of attackers. Figures emerged from the trees, dressed in the dark robes of the Jade Serpent Sect. They moved with eerie precision, like shadows given form, their swords and spears gleaming in the dim light of the forest. Wei Long was already in motion, his sword cutting through the first wave of attackers with a practiced ease. Lin Mei stood at his side, her daggers dancing in the air as she deflected an incoming spear before sending it back into the throat of its owner. But the Jade Serpent Sect's forces were relentless, more disciplined than any they had faced before. For every enemy they cut down, 2 more seemed to take their place. The battle quickly turned into a brutal melee, with steel clashing against steel and the cries of the wounded filling the air. Lei Feng fought with the same ferocity he always had, his blade cutting through their enemies like a whirlwind. Yet there was something different about him now. Wei Long noticed how Lei Feng seemed to hold back, how he avoided fighting too close to the group, as if keeping his distance, waiting for something. Waiting for the moment to strike. The fight raged on, and soon the clearing was filled with the bodies of the fallen. Wei Long could feel the exhaustion creeping into his limbs, but he pushed through it, the orb's dark energy feeding him strength he didn't know he had. Fall back! Lin Mei shouted, noticing how their enemies were closing in from all sides. We need to regroup. The group began to retreat, fighting off the advancing attackers as they moved toward a more defensible position. But as they reached the edge of the clearing, Wei Long saw it. Lei Feng and Gao Ren were no longer with them. They've split off, Wei Long realized, his heart racing. His instincts screamed at him to follow, to find out what they were planning. Without waiting for a signal, Wei Long broke from the group and darted into the trees, moving silently through the underbrush. He followed the faint sound of footsteps, his senses sharp, his focus unwavering. After a few minutes, he found them. Lei Feng and Gao Ren stood at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the valley below. There, nestled between the trees, was a large, fortified camp, the heart of the Jade Serpent Sect's operations in this region. We'll strike from the north, Gao Ren was saying, his voice low but intense. Their defenses are weakest there. Lei Feng nodded. Once the camp falls, the sect will be in disarray. That's when we make our move. The others won't see it coming. Wei Long's blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to betray him. They were planning to betray the entire group, to leave them vulnerable in the midst of battle so they could seize power for themselves. He stepped forward, his sword drawn. You're not going anywhere. Lei Feng and Gao Ren turned, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, there was silence, the tension between them palpable. Wei Long, Lei Feng said, his voice calm, almost amused. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Gao Ren drew his blade, his eyes cold. You've made a mistake coming here alone. Did I? Wei Long's grip tightened on his sword. You won't leave this forest alive. Lei Feng's smile faded, and for the first time there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew Wei Long wasn't the same warrior he had been just a few days ago. The orb's power had changed him, made him stronger, more dangerous. We don't have to do this, Lei Feng said, his voice smooth, almost coaxing. You're strong, Wei Long, stronger than you know. Join us. Together, we could take control of the sect, reshape it into something more than what it is now. Wei Long's eyes burned with anger. You're a coward, Lei Feng. Hiding behind lies, betraying your own people. I'd rather die than stand with someone like you. Lei Feng's expression hardened. So be it. The two clashed with a fury that shook the ground beneath their feet. Their swords moved in a blur, each strike filled with lethal intent. Gao Ren circled around, waiting for an opening, but Wei Long was ready for him. He moved with a speed and precision that defied belief, his blade finding gaps in their defenses with ease. The orb pulsed with dark energy, and Wei Long could feel its power surging through him, guiding his movements, amplifying his strength. But with every strike, he felt the darkness growing, wrapping itself around his mind like a vice. Lei Feng was strong, but Wei Long was stronger. With a swift, calculated strike, Wei Long disarmed him, sending his sword flying into the dirt. For a moment, Lei Feng stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. You were never going to win, Wei Long said, his voice cold. Lei Feng's mouth opened to speak, but before he could utter a word, Wei Long drove his sword through his chest. Lei Feng's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Gao Ren's eyes widened in horror and he turned to flee, but Wei Long was faster. In a blur of movement, he caught Gao Ren by the throat, lifting him off the ground with ease. "Tell me why," Wei Long demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Gao Ren struggled, his hands clawing at Wei Long's arm, but it was no use. We just wanted power." Wei Long's grip tightened, and with a sickening crack, he ended Gao Ren's life. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the forest silent around him. The battle was over, but the darkness within him had only grown stronger. Subscribe to Sakura Audiobooks. Give us a thumbs up, and leave a comment if you enjoy our work. Your support means a lot to us.